Hello, this is my video for my final project. Right here, I just have my concept stage report that I did. What I'm working on is evaluating NBA draft picks. Um, I started off with this because this is just something I was personally interested in, and I thought I would have, possibly some unique insights into. Uh, I found these data sets here that were really good, and I ended up doing exactly what I wanted to do in as much detail as I possibly could. The data sets were pretty limited, but I actually ended up getting some pretty good insights um, from what I could tell. Starting off here, I did a lot of this in R. I also used these other tools as we were required to, and I got some good insights from those as well. But I really enjoyed using R this semester, so that's really what I focused on doing as much as possible. Starting off, I want to, take a look at the data, clean it, and get it ready for use here. Here, it's going to load up R, like I was just starting the project over again, and I have a list of all the different things here. I need a few libraries, so I'm going to go ahead and import those. All right, we're good to go there. Next command here is I brought this CSV in. We'll bring it in here and then take a look and see what the data we're working with is here. So we got draft imported here. So this is for, again, this is for the NBA. So this is all of the drafts since I believe 1978. That's a yearly thing. There's a couple rounds, players taken at different rounds, and what I want to see is how successful are these guys in their career going forward. So this could be useful for NBA executives and for fans in terms of trading these picks. Kind of evaluating players before the draft. If we take this player at 12 overall, are they going to play for us for 5 years? Are they going to play 10 years? How many wins are they going to bring for our team? How valuable are they going to be for our team? So, this is a very valuable insight in terms of what you'd be willing to give up to get a draft pick. And projecting out wins or any kind of thing. It's just a very useful information to have. So this data set here in particular is each draft. First of all, the pick they were taken at, their name, and then how many years they played in the NBA, which is will come up many times later. And then draft is the year that they were taken in the draft. So then I got a second data set here we're going to bring in. This is a much larger data set here. This is season by season data from the same time period, starting in 1978 until both of these are up until 2013 to 2015. Actually, I believe it's 2015. And this is, every player that played in the NBA, and then the win shares they brought to the team. Now, win shares is an interesting thing. I struggled with how to quantify whether a player was successful in the NBA or not. What I was thinking at first was an all-star, which is, the top players in the league are voted on every season. But this is kind of very subjective. Sometimes it's just the most popular players, that sort of thing. So win shares is an interesting thing. Um, just to explain win shares a little bit, it's a statistic that attempts to give partial credit for team success to each individual on the team. So there's a very complicated formula here. This statistic has been proven to be pretty accurate overall over time. There's a very complicated formula here. I can't attempt to completely understand it without getting pretty technical here. But what it basically does is trying to estimate first their offensive win share, factoring in their shots made, their rebounds, their assists, taking away points for fouls, and then also their defensive win share, how many blocks they're getting, how many steals they're getting, and seeing like what they marginally add to the team. So there's a pretty complicated formula there, but it kind of comes up with a win share number, and each team has an average of 82 regular season games. So an average team will win 41 of those games. Um, so there's basically 41 win shares for an average team to break up. And you can see some outliers here on the screen. LeBron James had 20 win shares, which is incredible considering that basically makes him half of an average team. So I'll come back to this a little bit later, but basically this is the statistic I settled on determining, player success in the NBA. It's not necessarily a perfect reference as to their success. Maybe some players are outliers in some way or another, but it's a useful statistic for determining how valuable a player is to the team, and therefore be useful for evaluating draft picks on how many win shares they could bring in the future or over the course of their career potentially. So we got this data now. So now the goal I had was to both merge these data sets into one kind of usable thing, and then also to clean the data, because there's only one listing in the draft thing here for each player that was drafted, but there's many entries, because a player could play 16 years, so they would have 16 entries in this season table we have here. Each season they're gonna have a different win share. So I did a couple different things here. So let's merge these two tables here. So now I got the year, their pick, total years played, draft, season, win share. That's exactly what we wanted. And then I went ahead and changed their name for future reference. Yeah, so we got a different column here now. We just wanted to make sure we could, uniquely identify them here. So getting started with, the heart of what we're doing here, I just wanted to do a little visualization of, how much win share an average player is getting here. So, like I said, there's 41 for an average NBA team that's getting the average amount of wins, 41 total wins to divvy up between the different teammates, and then there is 15 players on an NBA roster typically, and there's also 30 teams in the NBA. So here you can see a probability density distribution. There's actually a surprising number of players below zero. So these are players that are actually negatively affecting their team, unfortunately. Um, there could be very many reasons for this. They miss too many shots, they turn the ball over too many times, something like that. But in some way, they are hurting their team. And then most of them are, clustered here between 0 and 2.5. So they're doing something for the team, maybe not much. And then we see more and more, the further we get up here, the more these are kind of outliers. The LeBron James, the Michael Jordans, these players we've always heard of would be up in this very crazy range up here. And, I did some quick math here that I'm going to use later on. So, like I was saying, there is 30 teams, and there are 41 win shares for an average team, a team that wins half their games. So there's that many for the entire league, and then there is 15 players on each roster, and so there is 450 total players in the NBA. So an average player over the course of the season is going to have a 2 point, or maybe median player is going to have a 2.73 win share in a season. So it lines up pretty correctly with what we're seeing here. That's what we're going to use later on as defining a successful player. Again, that's not a perfect metric of defining whether a player is, valuable or not, if they're successful or not. But, you can be an above average player if you have about 2.75 win shares in a season or more. So then continuing on here, we created another little thing here, taking out the data that we need. Um, so here we have a player name, the years they played in the NBA, and then their mean win share over the course of their career. So, add them all up and, divide by the number of years they played in the NBA. Here we go. Here's another thing that'll be valuable in terms of here is mean win share by year. And year meaning how many years a player has played in the NBA. So we see, probably unsurprisingly, well, I'll explain later, it is a little bit surprising, that as they become further into their career, their win shares increase. Um, they're becoming more experienced, they're becoming more talented, learning how to play the game better. So, on average, as a player gets deeper into their career, they are contributing more win shares. The surprising thing, though, is that even when they get to this 20-year mark, when they're maybe 40 years old, they're still averaging a lot of win shares, even more than their previous seasons. They're not declining at all. But really, a lot of what this trend is showing is the bad players just stop playing at a certain point. We can see around this year 20 mark, there's 10 players or so that are playing after 20 years in the NBA. But these are the all-time greats that have games that even as they become slightly slower or less quick on their feet or whatever, they're still valuable players. So part of this is showing a gaining of experience and talent and skills over the course of a career, and part of it is just showing bad players stop playing. They're not in the NBA anymore. So let's take this data table and overwrite it here. And now we have each draft year and then the mean win share from that draft. And let's get a visualization for that as well. And I'll explain what that's going to show us. So here we can see a kind of flat and then increasing win share per draft and then a declining at the end. This is the win share of the player over the entire course of their career, basically. And this is makes a lot of sense. Teams are getting smarter and smarter over the course of the years. More analytics are coming in. It's less based. There's more data available. Um, College players are more closely evaluated. Overall, just teams are able to use their draft picks a lot better and make better draft choices in terms of the success of the players they're taking. So I think that lines up a lot with what I would expect. At first I was confused by this drop off over here after about 2000, but this makes a lot of sense considering this data set. A lot of these players who were drafted after 2000 could possibly still be in the NBA. Um, some of them, especially towards the end here, are only a couple years into their playing careers. So this trend is going to continue up. It's just these players are still playing, so this number is still increasing for these draft years. But I still thought this was a great a way to look at this data to see how teams are becoming more advanced and more accurate in their draft picks. That they're not, taking players that are affecting them negatively. They're taking players that are going to give them wins for a long period of time. So then let's go into a little bit of whether a player is going to be above average or not. So that's kind of what I used as defining a successful draft pick or not. Again, there's a lot of ways you could determine that, but using this data set, that's the best means that I have is having a higher than 2.7 win share for a certain year. So just to show you what I ended up with here, ran some more things and ended up with this. I'm just going to show you in Excel. I didn't we're not doing any more of the stuff in Excel, but just wanted to show this data set a little bit. It's small enough that I could bring it up in Excel to show it. Here is every player, the pick they were chosen at, um, their number of years at a certain year, and then whether they had an above average win share in that year of their career. So this player, AC Green, was taken 23 overall when he was drafted. And this, for this current row here, he had played 15 years in the NBA, and he had this current year in this row above average win share. So he had above a 2.7 win share. Looking down here, this was in his 14th year of his career. He did not have an above average win share. So what I wanted to see was, how do your years in the NBA, so how much experience, how many years since you were drafted do you have, and then what pick you were chosen overall in the draft, how does that affect your ability to be an above average player in the NBA? So then I went into Wika here. I'm not sure if that's how it's pronounced, but that's just how I'm going to say it. And, I brought this data in here. We got the pick year, the years, and whether they had an above average win share. I wanted, that kind of yes or no criteria of whether they are good or not, for lack of a better word. So, what I did here was, excuse me, I wanted to get a tree. That's just what I remember doing from our examples in Wika here, and I thought this would be very applicable to this project. I found I ran this tree on this data set that I'm doing. I used the training data, and then here is the pruned tree that I came up with here. So if the pick is greater than 11, false. You're likely to be a non-average player. And then here's years, so experience. So this year one appears to be a very interesting cutoff. If you are, less than a pick 11, but greater than 11 years, often are false in terms of being an above average player. And but if you are, have less than 1 year experience and are less than a third round or less than the third pick, is often true versus false. This all makes a lot of sense. So you think the earlier picks generally are more successful, and in terms of years, you want to be in that kind of sweet spot range. That first year or two, you are probably still learning. In the last couple of years, you are probably declining. So this is a very good criteria. You want that sweet spot of age, and you want an earlier pick, which is better. So this decision tree lines up exactly with what I would think, and really could be a useful tool in terms of determining how useful a player is going to be for a certain season. If you have the number one pick in the first year, is probably going to be great, but that number 20th pick in the first year might not be an above average player, or likely will not be, according to this tree. So this tree was, kind of a great illustration and almost a guide to how good a player is going to be, whether they are an above average player or below average player. So next I used a little bit of RapidMiner. I did some cluster analysis here. Use that same data set I just talked about with, whether a player is above average or not. So here's interesting. We can do a cluster of, the pick and years. I changed some settings here, and then running this again here. So the summary here, a pick is much smaller, and years are smaller as well. I can look a little bit of the cluster data here. This really kind of separates itself mostly on the whether the pick is high, and then whether the years are low. It lines up a lot of the decision tree in a lot of ways. Like a lot more players ended up being in this the one cluster versus the other. So like the pick in cluster one is on average 66. And so it really clustered around the years primarily here. Just kind of going through showing all of the different things here. Yeah, scatter plot. I mean, you can see it kind of goes. Um, uh, you can kind of see the general trend. It's just a few. The blue dots are towards the top there more. Um, we can also do another cluster in RapidMiner I thought was interesting. This time doing it with the above average wind share. Excuse me. I probably could use more clusters in that last one, but here we go. Let's look at the data. Yes, this is again showing how the pick affects things a lot. Having a lower pick basically and a little bit higher years makes it a lot less a lot more likely that above average will be player will be true. Yeah, so I tried a lot of different numbers of clusters here just to see the different things that would happen. Like this one had this very small cluster, lots of cool interesting things, and it really lines up exactly with what I was kind of talking about earlier in terms of the decision tree. That you want low years but not too low, and you want a lowest pick as possible in general. Okay, so yeah, I did a lot of cluster analysis in here. Now hopping back in for a little bit more R. So here is going by, taking a look again at, the number, the pick, the first pick in the first round versus pick 30 or 38. Of course, the best players are going to generally be taken earlier, and I wanted to kind of confirm this and see if there wasn't any surprising things in this data. Overall, it seems that it lines up exactly what you think that this first player, their mean excuse me, their mean win share across all seasons is 5.77, which is double the average win share of an average player, according to our calculations earlier. That's very much unsurprising. And we see a pretty sharp drop off here. And I would say that's explained by there being such. There's almost always just one player that's a standout player, whether they're 7 foot tall or 300 pounds or something like that. There's often one standout player that really explains this massive drop off here. And there's some surprises, like this sixth pick seems to be significantly lower than any pick around it. I don't really have a great explanation for that. And you can just see generally as I scroll down here that general downtrend until you get into the one range, or even negative if you're in the 71st pick. But let's get a graph going here for this. Yeah, here we go. It's a pretty sharp drop off at the beginning, and then it slowly flattens out as you get to a later and later pick. So it's almost better. You could think of real life applications for this sort of information here. Is you really want a high pick, or you might as well have like a trading down picks would be more important in the earlier part of the draft versus the lower part of the draft. At that point, it just doesn't matter as much. Each player is much similar to another player you could replace them with several picks later. So just very interesting information that could be used in terms of a draft strategy for different teams. But overall, I felt like I achieved the goals of my this project. It would have been great to have a lot more categories and statistics to look at for the players, But I think really honing in on a few important things, where they were taken and how many wins they contributed, and uh, just those very basic statistics allowed me to really get some great but very simple models that I think really work well in terms of understanding this data and what it means for um, basketball in general. So, I think, yeah, really my conclusion here in terms of what I wanted to achieve, which was projecting how good a player is going to be in the NBA to, be a sign of value to them as a help to an NBA team or, fan. I think really this decision tree really sums it up the best. Um, and I think that this as a guide would be very useful in terms of determining whether a player is a success and predicting for the future um, what a draft pick is worth at a certain point in time. So thank you.